Hey, everybody. Got my buddy Jeff Selph today, and we're going to be talking about parents. Jeff, I know you were real young when you started out in youth ministry. How old were you when you got your first youth ministry gig?
I started serving as middle school Sunday school leader when I was in 10th grade.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I was leading the 7th through ninth grade boys every Sunday morning as a 10th grader. Those are probably the best lessons I ever wrote. And then, right, like I graduated high school, our church kind of like promoted you out of youth ministry when you got back from camp. And
oh,
so I went from like Saturday, I was a student, and Sunday I was a youth pastor intern. I was 18, and then he got fired from the church like 5 months later. So that was the end of that for me. My first unpaid youth ministry role ended
because his boss got
non-gloriously.
fired.
Yeah, yeah. They let me keep volunteering for free, but there was not going to be an official title on someone with my level of brashness, I think was the idea. And then I had then that same church like paid me for an internship a couple years later, and that one was more official. And I didn't get my first full time youth ministry job until I was 24. Actually, I did it for a year for free, bivocationally, trivocationally, because I was also a full time student.
Ooh,
So
three gigs.
full time work, full time student, free youth pastor. I was also married, so I didn't sleep a lot. And then
Yeah,
after a year, they hired me because they were worried that I would quit and go somewhere else that would hire me.
I mean it's good that they
That's
hired you because there's no
no,
part time stuff in youth ministry
yeah.
here.
I say this with grace to any of your listeners, but the only reason I think it's good that they hired me is because it was the last shoulder shake that God had to give me to get me to leave the Baptist church, which He had tried to gently lead me out of like three times already. But it was all I knew, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't wrap my mind around not being Baptist. My mind is fully wrapped now. Um, that job really helped with that.
I'm glad God used it as a formative experience experience for you so that you
Yeah.
could get to where you are now.
Well, yeah, I think to really becoming who God made me to be, right? Like I might have a different perspective on denominational differences. I think we tend to clump together with people that are wired like us spiritually. And so if everybody at your church speaks in tongues, it's not that everybody should speak in tongues, it's that you all were drawn together. And if everybody at your church doesn't speak in tongues, that's probably because you would be weirded out if someone did and you were together. And that doesn't make one side right or wrong. I think we can biblically support, you know, both of those sides. Um, but I think for me, I just was not wired to worship God that way. And so I have moved on to other things,
Yeah.
and it's been great.
So when you were in that first position, 24 years old, newly married, how was how was ministering to parents in that season? Like how was trying to relate to the parents who were bringing students to youth group, being late to sign up things. How was that experience for you?
It was difficult. And let me just say that I wasn't newly married. I got married at 19. So I had 5 years under the belt. But
Wow.
uh, yeah, so, that kind of makes you an evangelical superstar in certain circles. So I had some cachet. I would say in my first church, it was a little bit easy because of the level of authority the church placed on the pastorate. It was like, maybe Jeff doesn't know what he's doing, but he told us this is what we're doing and we have to do it.
Because he's
And so, yeah, but like I was constantly having to ask parents. I had a couple parents that I was really close to, and I'd be like, hey, what would you do with this teenager? Because I had no idea. I had no context for that. It was more difficult a couple years later when I started at my last job, and I was the youth and children's pastor there, and my child was 3 weeks old when I started.
mm,
So, my first child. So I don't like. people are like, well, what gives you the authority? Like, how do you know that that actually works for children's and youth ministry?
Yeah,
Because I had a really well tempered newborn, and I didn't have anything to do with that other than like genetically, right? Like that's just how God wired Jacob. So,
absolutely.
uh, yeah, so like that was kind of weird, like trying to connect and give advice based on what I'd seen, and then if the advice didn't line up with what they already believed or what they wanted, it was pretty easy to dismiss. Even if I was borrowing the wisdom of somebody who was older, who did, write a book that I read or at a seminar that I attended. Um, but I partnered well with the lead pastor on that at my last church. He had 6 kids. He had, when I started, one was a senior, one had just graduated. And so I was able to like partner with him a little bit and kind of borrow his gravitas and his, people trusted him. So, that was one of the first things I did was get in good with him and get him to help me and support me.
I really like the idea that you're saying two different things. One, bringing in other parents and saying, how would you handle this kid if they were your kid? Like, what would be the thing that you would do? And two, borrowing from the wisdom of like trusted voices, right? So either senior pastor and saying, well, I don't say this. My boss says this, or the pastor says this, and this is good wisdom for us to take. Or, hey, I read this book on student ministry, or perhaps this one thing that you're dealing with. And then you're saying, like, it's not my authority as a young guy with a 3 week old. I'm using other people's authority to then speak truth into you.
Yeah. And a lot of those were like, well, Dave and I talked, and here's what we think. And as far as anybody ever knew, Dave and I thought exactly the same, which
Yeah.
over 12 years became really evident that we didn't.
Right.
And we love each other and work together well, but we disagree on a lot of things.
Sure. But in
So,
those
but early on,
conversations,
people thought we were in lockstep.
yeah. In those early conversations, people were like, oh, you and Pastor think this? Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, and he has 6 kids that are all adults and passionately pursuing God. So I'm not going to question his methods. We just will disagree on other things.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, I talk a little bit about that too, of how parents might even think of your advice, even if you don't have that situation right now. For example, right? Yeah, so like I've got all girls, you've got all boys, right? So how can we
Yeah,
possibly give each other parenting advice, right? I think that same thing can apply to youth ministry sometimes when they go, well, but your kids are all great, mine are heathens, or flip vice versa. Why would I listen to you, youth pastor? Your kids are nuts, right?
yeah. My kids are really good, so that's helpful. Actually, I think that lends an authority. Like, you watch Jacob, who's a freshman, and Jax, who's in 4th grade, and you see the way they like care for people and the level of respect that they show people. And people listen because they think Sarah and I must have something right
Mm,
because our kids are doing the right thing. I think that one thing that I would share is that like I have all boys, you have all girls, but the truth is every kid's an individual, anyways. I couldn't tell you if you had 2 boys exactly how to raise those kids
yeah, yeah,
because their personalities will be different and they'll be motivated differently, and they'll respond to different stimuli. So really, it's about like what are the biblical principles that are core
hmm,
that would apply to everybody. Now, how do you apply that to your child? And if I know your child, which I tend to if they're in my student ministry,
right.
I might be able to say, like, yeah, what I've noticed is your daughter tends to respond to this, in our conversations or in small groups, and to say, like, so that's how we try to work with her and just kind of float that. But it's really about a core principle, not boys, girls, middle school, high school.
Yeah, and I really do like how you're saying, hey, let's if we are working off foundationally scripture and we're in a Christian church, all coming from a Christian background, I think we could probably agree that if this foundational principle comes from the Bible, then it's good and right, even if it's a 24-year-old giving it, or a older guy giving it, or someone who doesn't have the same amount of kids or no kids at all, if they're able to say, I see this truth in scripture, and then I also observe what's going on with your kid, yeah, I think I can speak into this.
Yeah. And really, like, we're not telling anyone how to raise their kids anyway, right? Like, when you frame it like it's the biblical principle, and if this is discipleship, well,
Sure.
I may not, and I do now, but I may not have had, kids or older kids, but I had discipled people. I had discipled other people's middle schoolers. I had led other people to Christ and then into deep relationship with Him. So framing it around that discipleship and the core biblical principle was a good thing early on.
Yeah.
And now it's just like I'm not, I'm not going to tell people how to raise their kids. Like, I'm at a totally different stage now. I I'm friends with a lot of parents because they're my peers. They're in the, like, I'm in a small group with other parents from the church
Hmm.
because we get along and we're the same age and our kids are friends. So it's easier to connect in that way now. And they still, now it's just awkward. Like, hey, like, I know you're here and you're not, like, I'm not at work, but can I ask you a question? Or they'll call me like when their kids aren't around. And it's not a social call to see how I'm doing. It's like, what am I supposed to do?
It's a youth ministry conversation that they're asking their
Yeah,
friend, right? Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, who happen to work with teenagers all of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's different now. But I'm still not like, well, make sure you this bedtime and you better have the quiet time in the morning and make sure you do this devotional. Like, I think a lot of stuff's very flexible. So why would I care what you do?
Yeah.
I don't even do the
Yeah.
same thing with both of my kids. So why would I expect you to do the same thing with one of yours?
No, I think you bring up a valid point of like the difference between raising your children, right, and having a discipling relationship with somebody else's kids, right? Like
Yeah,
those are two absolutely separate things.
yeah. Although I guess part of raising your kids is discipleship, and I'll share. Like, I think we've talked about like what I've done with both of my sons, and I'll offer that to people. Like, hey, like, this is what I do, but you don't have to do that whole production, right? Like, I
Yeah.
take my kids on a trip, and we go, like, we stayed with my brother, and then we hit New York City, Philadelphia, Washington D.C., Baltimore, on different days. But the best time was spent for me in the car, because in a car
Yeah.
they're not looking at you, and you probably shouldn't be looking at them. So you can have hard discipleship conversations. Both of my kids got their like initial surface level sex talk in the car on this trip that I took them to.
Hmm.
Age appropriate for an 8-year-old, and like, so that's just like, this is what I do, but you don't have to do that. You could literally just like, you could drive into Chicago. That's You're going to be in the car for a couple hours round trip, and you can
Yeah.
have a serious conversation while they're looking straight ahead.
Yeah. And
So,
they can't go anywhere.
yeah, yeah, just let's put our phones down and let's just talk.
Hmm.
So, like, I might say, like, this is what I'm doing. Maybe you try it, or maybe this is a way you can try and utilize some of that, but you don't have to do it the way I do it.
Oh, that's great. Oh man, good wisdom, Jeff. I do appreciate not only your friendship, but how you do student ministry, how you do parenting, who you are. Real
Thank
quick,
you.
give yourself just a quick introduction for anybody who might be like, "Hey, Jeff's cool. I want to know what Jeff's up to."
Well, my name is Jeff Selph, and I'm the student pastor at the chapel, Libertyville. We're a multi site church. I'm at the Libertyville campus. I don't blog anymore. When I was leaving my last church, I noticed, like, right away, I think it was chemistry staffing, was like, do you have a blog? And if so, I had to provide the web address, and I didn't want to be responsible for anything I had said 10 years ago.
Fair.
So I went to WordPress, I deleted my blog, and then I selected no because I didn't want to lie. So I deleted it. Then I answered the question and moved on. So you won't find me there. I left the hellscape that is Twitter a few years ago.
Well done.
You can find me on Instagram at Jeff Selph4, with self with a PH. That's about the only place you're going to follow me. probably. So
Fantastic. Dude, Jeff, like I
yeah,
said, appreciate your friendship, appreciate your wisdom. Thanks for talking to me, man.
you're welcome. Hey, can I say one thing before I go?
What if I said no?
You want me to say it because
Okay, go
this is
ahead.
a direct quote that you told me to say. Hey, Ronald knows youth ministry, and you should listen to him and stuff.
It's true.
Unquote.
I did tell you to say those words. You're right.
You were you were saying it, and I was like, "That's funny." I'm going to type word for word what he is saying.
Perfect. It works. It
Well,
works well.
you didn't tell me to say that. You just wanted people to believe that. So I said the best way for them to believe that is to have a trustworthy individual like myself say it in your own words.
I wouldn't ask anyone else to, Jeff. I wouldn't ask anyone else to. Hey, thanks so much, man.
You're welcome.
Hey, youth pastors and ministry leaders, I've got some exciting news for you. On November 28th at 1 p.m. Central, I'm hosting a webinar you don't want to miss. It's called How to Communicate Like a Pro, and it's all about taking your youth ministry communication to the next level. In this webinar, we're going to dive deep into the art of digital discipleship, covering everything from mastering email and texting to harness the power of social media for your youth ministry. We're also going to explore effective church communication strategies and more. If you've ever wanted to build a stronger connection with your parents, your students, and your church community, this webinar is for you. I want to equip you with the knowledge and skills you need to communicate like a pro and make a lasting impact in your youth ministry. So mark your calendars for November 28th at 1 p.m. Central. You can register for the webinar in the link below and join me as we empower each other and work towards strengthening our youth ministries. Don't forget to subscribe and share the news with your fellow youth pastors. Let's make a difference together and level up our communication game. So we'll see you November 28th at 1 p.m. Central Time for How to Communicate Like a Pro. Stay tuned for more updates, and I can't wait to see you there.